The following discussion is not necessarily the views of all involved. The goal is to start open and honest discussion in the Christian worldview. Like all things, weigh what you hear with what you know and join us in our pursuit for the truth. Enjoy the podcast.
This is going to be the most crackpot Josh defense of something. Read it out loud.
I have to read this?
I said no questions, Colin.
No, just
you gotta read it as written.
I can't do this.
Maybe Josh just doesn't know colors.
Josh is colorblind for those who don't know.
No, that context is not important.
Right.
All right, I'd like to welcome everyone to the Second Rate Saints podcast. I'm one of your hosts here, Caleb. To my left is
Joshua. To my left is...
I am Colton, and to my left,
I'm Joel, and to my left,
me, Caleb. We've gone full circle. There are four of us, which means we're missing one.
two. Oh.
Colton doesn't know how to count, and he doesn't know how to deal with multiple names.
Distinguishable humans.
I'm
Cole and
keeping the
Stewart.
meme alive.
These guys don't
Cole and
know.
Stewart are gone.
You guys don't know how names work. That's okay, though. Joel,
We know.
where
I
can
know.
people find Stewart/Cole?
Stewart/Cole. Check us out at secondratesaints.com for all of our past and future episodes. If you'd like to support the podcast, you can go to our Buy Me a Coffee link at buymeacoffee.com/secondratesaints or use the link on our website. If you'd like to follow what we're doing kind of more in real time, you can check us out on Instagram and on X, where we will have some contacting stuff on there as well. For our future episodes, I mentioned you can find our past and future episodes. We're looking forward to one of our future episodes, the 100th episode of Second Rate Saints. Woo, yeah, Josh. He's holding in a woo. Woo. Nice.
It's coming soon.
We are excited to begin recording. We've started to put together... What's up? We're starting to put together a collection of questions, comments, and concerns from our listeners that have gotten us into 100 episodes. If you have something you'd like us to discuss, a question you'd like to ask, something about the podcast you'd just like to point out, send us a message, send us an email at secondratesaints@gmail.com. Furthermore, we have a segment, What Have You Read? Which we are not doing today, and instead we are asking our audience, what have you read? So if you have a book that you've read recently that you would like us to review on the podcast, again, hit us up at secondratesaints@gmail.com. Anything, theology, philosophy, even anything else, really. Like we're pretty open. Like, tell us what you've read. Let us talk about it, and we'll read it and talk about it on the podcast. Cool. That's enough for my preamble. Today's much awaited episode of the series is episode 2 of our Battle of the Bibles, which is our translation series. So if you found this episode while looking for different reviews on translations, this is going to be the controversial and the kind of goofy ones. This is where we're putting the ones that we'll say controversial. That's what we'll call them. We'll just start off controversial.
Some of them.
And we have some that,
bad.
Are respectable and some that have led to deep heresy. So we'll get into it.
Oh, good.
So
Yeah.
Caleb, you actually have the first one on the docket to review. Now, can you give us a brief overview of your translation of choice?
Absolutely. So I chose to do the Amplified Bible, which is not the worst Bible.
It's like the regular Bible, but louder.
Well, yeah, it's everything's in capitals.
It's got its own microphone. Just to hook it up to the recorder.
Yeah.
Careful. We'll break our sound system.
It's originally it has a weird backstory. It's originally like the vision and a lot of the work of a person called Francis Seward, who lived from late 1800s, mid 1900s, and then the Lockman Foundation in association with Zomverden actually put it forward, and it came out in phases. At first, it came out with just the Gospel of John, then the whole New Testament, then Job to Malachi, and then Genesis to Esther, then the whole thing.
Really,
That's a weird
Genesis to
order.
Esther was near
Yeah.
last.
Yeah.
It's
That's a weird
super
order.
weird that the Pentateuch was one of the last ones.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very weird. And then it had an update in 87.
Okay.
So its main claim, and its main claim is it's using the ASV. So that'd be like, I think is that 1904?
1901.
A one. Yes. It uses the ASV as one of its main sources. And then it tries to go back to the original Greek and Hebrew, trying to illuminate, hey, let's give some other, many of these words in Greek and Hebrew mean more than just like one English word,
Yeah.
right? Or could mean more than one English word. And that's actually both the strength and the weakness of this Bible.
Yeah.
And so what they'll do is they'll add brackets into help, like give, hey, this word, like if you were to use hesed, the Old Testament hesed, ESV will use loving kindness, right? But you have like covenantal faithfulness, loving kindness, and there's several ways that word can be rendered, and it's like a multifaceted concept that's being presented in that Hebrew word. But obviously in English, we're limited unless you want to have, word, comma, word, comma, word, comma, word, comma, which is what this Bible does.
Yeah. It adds every single, is it every single different version of that word? That could be?
No.
Oh.
And it's not even all the ones that you can find in concordances. Sometimes there's sometimes there's a theological motive into which words they allow in those brackets. It's a little odd. That's
weird.
one of the weird things. So the notes or amplifications, if you will.
Yeah.
Yep.
There's two
Do
different.
they actually call them amplifications?
I didn't see that.
Okay,
No,
cool.
not in the.
But that's why it's called the Amplified.
Yes.
It takes every word and puts echoes around it, basically.
And not every word. A lot, like especially in the Old Testament, you have entire chapters with nothing.
Really?
Yeah, which I found actually kind of very frustrating.
Is that just directly ripped from ASV then?
And they had some more updates from there, but yeah,
Because I know when we talked about it on the last episode, NLT also had ASV and RSV as their two main ideas. So there
Same as
is
the one I talked about.
yeah.
It's a base for a lot of modern translations.
same thing with the ESV. But then it seemed like the ESV just kind of threw it out of the window and went, now let's just go back to text.
Yeah.
So there's two different types of brackets. When you pick this Bible up, you'll notice there's one of those round brackets, and there's like the square brackets, and they communicate different things. And if you don't know that, you're going to be misreading this. And it also goes into one of the other strengths and weaknesses of this Bible. In the rounder brackets, there's additional phrases of meaning, including the original word, phrase, or clause of the original language. And then in the square brackets, containing justified, clarifying words or comments not actually expressed in the immediate original text, as well as definitions of Hebrew and Greek names.
I
Right.
think I agree with the definition of Hebrew and Greek names.
Let me give you an
I agree with that,
example
yeah.
of why this might be a problem.
Okay.
Okay. This is one of the most confusing passages in Exodus.
Okay.
So half of them.
No, this is way worse.
I'm just kidding. Exodus isn't that bad.
This is where Moses is on his way, doing God's will, going back to save his people,
Oh, I know what we're at.
and God makes him sick. And then this is the circumcision of his son.
Yep.
And then his wife rubs
Yep.
the circumcision on.
Before he goes back to Egypt.
Yes.
I can't believe this is the verse you're setting.
No, but you've read this in other translations. This is what
True.
it does. Okay. And this is kind of one of its weaknesses. Along the way at a square brackets, resting place, and of course, square brackets, the Lord met Moses and actually sought to kill him, square brackets, made him actually and almost fatally ill, end of square brackets.
Okay.
Square brackets. Now, apparently, he had failed to circumcise one of his sons, his wife being opposed to it. But seeing his life in much danger, end of square brackets, Zipporah took a flint knife and cut off the foreskin of her son and cast it on Moses' feet. What happened?
Right.
They shoehorn
Yeah.
a very non-justified interpretation immediately in there.
Yeah.
Specifically that she didn't want to have him circumcised.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And And like, and so that's one of the problems that you'll notice as you go through with it.
Yeah.
Now, here, I'm going to read some of the other ones. So like, here's one that might be better. Okay. This is John 1:1, and then I'll jump to verse 14. So John 1:1
Right.
and
In
1:14.
the beginning was God, the Word was God, and the Word was a God, right?
That's your translation.
Yeah,
and
we
we'll
can
get
get
there. In the beginning, square bracket, before all time, and square bracket, there was the Word, soft brackets,
Mm.
Christ, in case you didn't know.
There's the word. That's
very
Jesus.
specific. Yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
And the Word was with God, and the Word was God himself. Now skip to verse 14. And the Word, soft brackets, Christ, became flesh, soft bracket, human, incarnate.
Yes.
Human incarnate.
Yeah.
Correct.
End of bracket. And tabernacled.
Wait, what?
No, this gets into one of the weird strengths. We're going to get into
Yeah.
it. Soft brackets. Fixed his tent of flesh,
Mm.
lived among, and end of soft bracket, lived among us. And we, square brackets, actually, end of square bracket,
Oh my gosh.
I'm
Wow.
so confused.
Yeah, this is messing with
saw
my
his
head.
glory. That is his glory, his majesty. And then goes on. So here's one of the weird things. One of the odd actual things that they do get to do here. They do get to use the word tabernacled because they're going to go on to explain what that means in their brackets,
Hmm.
which is a weird little thing that they can do. So in the same way, they can use the word firmament.
Yeah.
And then go, hey, expanse, like,
Mhm.
and give
Right.
it further explanations.
Give an actual definition of what that means.
Yeah,
in
with-
context.
Exactly. So there is a weird strength in this.
Because if we say tabernacled when we're talking about, no one's going to know what we're talking about.
Exactly,
Or
but
they're going to misunderstand. Yeah.
Exactly. So there's a weird, like, well, that's,
Yeah. I still think it's a little confusing. I don't know if that's
Oh, yeah.
necessarily a strength, more it's like, that's cool.
oh, it's a unique feature.
Yeah. It feels like that's it for a study Bible more so than an actual translation.
So are they targeting academics with this? Because in my mind, if you want borderline and interlineary that's putting random definitions into your Bible,
Study Bible.
get an interlineary.
Well, this is part of this is the thing. Who would you recommend this book to? Who would you recommend this Bible to? Someone who is never going to pick up ever
Mm.
an interlineary or a
Or
word
listen to a
study.
sermon on the thing.
Yeah, ever, or never even pick up a study Bible. At the same time, don't think that anybody should ever actually stay in any of those locations. So I don't think that I'd recommend this. Here's
Sorry, continue.
in a certain way, I think it may be helpful right out of the gate for someone, like someone who's a brand new Christian. Like, I don't know what tabernacled means.
Mm-hmm.
You read that. What does the firmament have to do with anything? Read about it. Okay. And especially in some of the major prophets, when the same person's talking, but for multiple chapters, every now and then it'll insert, and I say to you, and it's like, okay, so this is this person.
Okay.
And it's like, oh, okay. So it's a little bit easier for someone to follow what's going on or who's saying what exactly when it's jumping back and forth, back and forth, back and
Yeah.
forth. Now you can see how in something like Song of Psalms, where it's a little bit vague who's saying a certain section.
Right. Sometimes on purpose.
Mm-hmm. And that's going to make a definitive claim. And it's going, and here's the problem. Here's the controversial part. People who buy this Bible generally think that they're like, oh, because English hides hidden meanings in the Bible, this is going to show me some like the hidden
Yes,
real
get the
truths
full truth. Yeah.
behind the Greek and the Hebrew. And that's not at all.
Yeah, then you read 7 different definitions of the same word, and you're like, yes, now I understand it better rather than, I'm confused. I don't know what's going on.
And Hesed can have multiple dimensions, but there's a lot of words in the Old Testament that just because it can mean 8 of those things,
Mhm.
it is only one.
And by including it sometimes, like I'm sure that there actually is a fair amount of rigor put into their translation, but there are going to be times where the bias is going to show.
Well, and it's
Where
like
they put in two different translations of a word when really it should only be meant as one. But I doubt it's that often.
well, and you have words like vav in Hebrew, the word for and, which has 8 other definitions
Mhm.
that mean
Context,
something
yeah.
Totally different.
totally different. Now,
The conjunction,
but,
yeah.
then, Like,
It's
Yeah.
a basic conjunction, but usually means and.
yeah. And it rarely means those other things. But like, if you swapped it up, having those other definitions don't help at all. They
But-
contradict.
and they
We can have
still
explicitly.
the amplified
and
wouldn't do
nor
that.
beside each other and really get very confused.
The amplified doesn't do stuff like that.
Yeah.
It doesn't do every single word. It's only words where it'd be like, oh, this would help a person understand
Yeah.
this passage better. Part of the problem is if you were to pull out the Vine, what's the textbook now? Vine's, whatever, their lectionary.
Yeah.
Mounts? No.
Ooh, right.
Vine
Yeah.
stuff. You know what I'm talking about there.
Mhm.
A lectionary. If you were to pull one of those out, you would see that, oh, this word can mean 8 different things.
Mhm.
But what they'll do in the Amplified is they'll give you 3 of those that reveal the theological leaning. And especially there's some heavy systematizing
Right.
being forced in to a lot of texts.
They'll take a lot of like later ideas of Trinity and put it.
Oh,
We're
not
back
just
in
that,
the-
just like predestination or
Oh, okay.
like smaller
I would agree with
theological
the
stuff.
Trinity. I would agree with the Trinity stuff.
Yeah, that's not at all. Yeah, that's not at all what
Right.
I'm talking about. This is it's more controversial.
Oh, okay.
Just in your systematics.
Like a branch of Protestantism
Yes,
decided to write its own Bible.
a different.
Which is kind of how Protestants do.
we
Well,
oftentimes
when in
we get
Geneva.
we get
Like my
together and write
translation.
our own. We get together and write translations now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
true.
Thankfully.
If you listen to our last episode,
Mhm.
you'll hear on this series. You'll hear how actually several translations were Protestants and some Catholics even at times
Yes.
Yeah.
gathered
The
together.
NIV, which had multiple different traditions and denominations involved.
All of ours had were multi-denominational.
Yeah, you can kind of make the case that KJV wasn't and is.
Yeah,
It's
that
Puritans
one's more,
and Anglicans
that
at the
one's a
same
little
time.
more confusing. Yeah.
Yeah, Puritans and Anglicans. We'll just stick with that. Yeah, and I don't think I'd say the Amplified's bad.
Mm.
I don't think so.
Right.
My worry is generally when somebody were to bring it, let's say to a Bible study, my worry is that they're going to interrupt the flow of the entire Bible study. They're going to say, but the word could mean this, and try to imply that the Hebrew really leans this way, and it's, modern English Bibles are hiding some of the meaning.
Yeah.
Or that they'll believe that their amplified version will reveal to them deeper secrets of the Greek and the Hebrew.
Mhm.
That's just not true.
Mhm.
Admitted.
Is that how it's advertised?
That's the thing.
Mhm.
Kind of.
Mm.
It is leaned into a bit. And even when you read the preface of like this book, it's like I have it in front of me. It kind of gives that vibe where it's like, we kind of just want, people to really engage the full Greek and Hebrew range of things. It's like,
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I don't disagree with that. It feels, at least to me, what a study Bible does usually, not all study Bibles are good, does well. Or what reading a commentary alongside the Bible does well, and just does it slightly not as good as those things.
You know what is the
Makes
best?
it more confusing.
The best version of this, and for English, what this is trying to do, if you want a real honest approach, the NET's Full Notes Translation Bible.
Mm.
It is gigantic.
Mhm.
The actual amount of biblical text on each page is very small, and then it's just loaded from side, like the entire margins of the page
Mhm.
is just footnotes on why they
Sometimes-
translated it this way, how it
Mhm.
could be translated other ways. It's beautiful.
Yep. I've seen parts of it. It's really cool. You
Yeah.
get to Jonah and like half the book, it's only 4 chapters long. And it's like tiny little sections of text.
Yeah, it's like 4 verses a
Massive-
page.
Yeah,
Yeah.
massive amounts of notes.
Yeah, for why this translation, how it could go this way. What does it mean
Is
if
it
it goes this
multiple
way?
books then?
No, it's like the
Yeah,
one
it's
that
just
I
like
have.
chunky
It's like
words.
it's like
3,000 pages.
pretty close. Yeah,
It's like it's just a really, really big
you
study
can also
Bible.
get that online, by the way, for free.
You can?
I think that would be a much better version of the Amplified. Would be the NET Full Notes.
Hmm.
But otherwise, I'm not gonna say that you shouldn't read the Amplified.
It's not like mistranslated or something like
No.
that. It's just a little confusing sometimes.
And so that for that reason, I think it's kind of controversial, and because you have people that are just like, it's evil.
Yeah.
But no.
I mean, it says predestination, therefore it's evil, right?
Well, then Paul's way off base.
Whoa.
Okay.
Do
Well,
we have
thank you.
anything
Out of
more we
10.
want to discuss about?
Yes, out of
Yeah.
10. 10 being
King James.
NEV.
10 being King James, 1 being what? The Message?
The
Mormon.
Queen, no. The
Book of
one
Mormon.
being the Queen James.
The Queen.
No, oh
This is Prince Amplified.
no. Prince Amplified.
Can you show me the cover?
We're not gonna
talking
rate the
Bibles. We're not
cover.
going to do.
No, but you're the only one with a hardcover.
It's
This
a
one is
pretty
horrendous.
amplified
They
looking
don't
cover.
know. They're
It's
going to Google
horrendous.
Amplified and go, oh, there's 80 different covers.
That's 2 out of 5.
You just wanted to say this. You just wanted to say this cover sucks.
No, we didn't do a cover.
He didn't
today.
get
That
to
was
do
all.
a book cover, so he has to.
What color is it, Josh?
Red.
You're right.
Wrong answer. No, it is red.
Josh is colorblind for those who don't.
No, that context is not important.
Right.
Maybe Josh just doesn't know colors.
Never went to
Maybe
preschool.
I wasn't raised by civilized man.
What do you mean, mate?
Man. Anyway.
Okay, well, thank you for that covering of the Amplified Bible. I actually hadn't read the Amplified Bible at all before we got into this.
You don't have to.
Well, other than the verses you were showing me before we started. Yeah. Well, I feel like that's one end of the extreme where you could still consider that a pair of... Where does it land on dynamic equivalence? Because we introduced that topic in our last...
Yeah, it's
episode.
kind of weird because
Okay.
even as I was reading to you,
Mhm.
right? Because of how many interjections in a lot, like especially in the New Testament, to help clarify, I would put it more like a paraphrase.
Should we define what dynamic equivalence is right now?
It
Or
was
should
in
we
our
wait?
first episode, so
Mhm.
we could just lean on that and say, hey,
Could you give
check it out
quick
for a
definition?
longer discussion on it.
Yeah.
But we're going to go with dynamic equivalence being the difference between literal word-for-word translations, is a
Yep.
lot of times how they say, or thought-for-thought translations.
Right.
Where thought-for-thought is more you're not trying to match every Hebrew word to every English word, but you're rather trying to convey the entirety of the verse,
Right.
whereas literal is trying to do that one-for-one
I think
Right.
word.
I think I have an answer for this on the Amplified. Then
Sure.
it is technically a word for word that believes thought for thought it would be better.
So it tries to be one thing, but heavily implies another.
It heavily, it's like, yeah, but like thought for thought would be better though.
Yeah, it is kind of just half doing
Interesting.
thought for thought. So in dynamic equivalence, if you were to put it on a kind of a scale back and forth, it's actually on a different axis.
It has its own
on the
value.
Y.
Here's the thing, just for
Y-axis.
reference, I'd
Some
put it
secret third
slightly
thing.
more word for word than the Message.
Yes,
Yeah,
I agree.
well, I think you do that with pretty much everything.
And we're going to get into that. No, I don't think the Message is the worst. The worst is not the fair way to say that.
The worst is yet to come.
Okay.
Our next controversial topic.
And this is why we decided to make it controversial,
Not bad.
not bad,
Yeah.
because Eugene Peterson's our boy, you know?
Is he?
great.
Is he?
He just passed away a little while ago. And
Oh.
He is.
Yeah.
He is like from our area.
Yeah, he finished off his theological career at Regent, which is down the road from us. So we've got a little bit of an allegiance to him,
As the director of spiritual theology.
which I thought was an odd title for him. But I did a little bit of reading on Eugene Peterson, which I kind of liked because he was doing what Kenneth Taylor, the author of the NLT, which is what I covered in our first episode, he was doing what Kenneth Taylor was doing at pretty much the same time. So let me tell you what I found for the history of the Message Bible. And the Message Bible, if you haven't heard of it,
Everyone's
then honestly,
favorite.
I'm surprised because it's everyone's favorite Bible translation to make fun of.
Yes.
Everyone has an opinion on it, one way or another.
Everyone feels
And they're-
super justified.
They feel
Hating.
very justified telling Eugene Peterson that he was wrong and should feel bad. Okay, so the year was 1982,
Uh-oh.
and
Is this story time with Joel?
this is story time with Joel. 1982, Eugene Peterson pulls out his pen and his pencil or what? That's not clear.
Pencil.
Pulls out a pencil. I feel like this is the kind of translation that's written in pencil.
On a napkin.
On a napkin.
Wow.
No, in 1982, he did a translation. You could say a translation. He did a reiteration of the Beatitudes. He
Dramatic
actually started
retelling.
with the Beatitudes.
Okay.
And then somebody found his translation, and they cited it, and they used it as an example. And then basically an editor started bugging him, hey, you should make a whole thing out of this. So then I believe it was John 10. Is that right? Do you start with John 10? Sorry, I put too many notes here, and now I'm getting lost in my own notes. Okay, the John 10. Yeah, he got into it and then kind of decided that he had kind of, rather than translating, he wanted to put it into his own voice, into his own vernacular. He was less concerned with the dynamic equivalence argument that was going on at the time with the NLT versus the NRSV and all this kind of stuff, like the big ones that were like, hey, it needs to be extreme one way or extreme another way. He kind of just wanted to put it in the common vernacular, which is respectable. But he saw himself more as translating the emotion of the text rather than the text of the text, which is not a legitimate way to do translation. And he kind of acknowledges that. Mm-hmm. He's like, okay, I understand this is not really how to do it, but he kind of, here's my issue with the Message Bible. People say the Message Bible is not a translation. It's more of a commentary. It's fine, and I'm sympathetic to that. Unfortunately, it was sold as the Message translation, right? So as much as you can say, hey, Eugene Peterson wasn't working on a translation, he was working on a thought-for-thought dynamic equivalence, this paraphrase. I really just don't think that's a justifiable thing because he sold it as a Bible by itself. Here's why I'm sympathetic to it. It just sounds good, right? If you read some of his translations, even of like Psalm 23.
That the Lord is my shepherd.
No, it's the Lord my God, I don't need a thing. That's how it starts off.
The Lord is my God?
The Lord is my God, I don't need a thing. I think that's what it is.
That is closer to the Hebrew.
Yeah, it's and that's what he was doing, right? And he is actually a scholar. He actually does know Greek and Hebrew really well. It feels a little bit like if you were a songwriter and you wrote very technically impressive songs.
The other
and
way
then one
around.
day you're like, what if I just freestyle? And it's like, I'm telling you how I think about music. This is kind of how the translation in my mind works for Eugene Peterson.
Yeah.
Where he's like, okay, rather than just translating, I'm going to read the Greek and the Hebrew, and I'm just going to tell you kind of how I'm feeling about it, how I see the text actually
How he
conveying emotion,
understands.
conveying syntax, like just kind of like,
Right.
Yeah.
How he understands the thrust of that verse to be.
yeah,
Well, and the reason it has weight is because before he was going to be a pastor, he was strictly in scholarship for Hebrew and Greek.
Yeah.
Yes.
He is a very impressive scholar. It's not like he was some random dude just picked up.
The protege underneath one.
Yeah. But not everyone knows
famous
who.
dude.
Was he
Eugene
under
Peterson
Bruce
is.
Metzger?
Potentially.
I mean, that's the type of
I never came across it.
what's it? Pedigree.
Right.
That's
Yeah,
the level of pedigree.
He is impressive. Yeah.
Didn't our language prof take language under? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
He studied with Peterson.
Our professor also used to get advanced copies of the Message while he was at school.
That's awesome.
That's
Really?
very cool.
Yeah.
Well, and that's how it kind of worked out. It actually was between 1993 and 2002. It was gradually being published. It's, like you said, a paraphrase. Here's how Peterson explains it. The whole point was to bring the New Testament to life for two different people. Those who hadn't read the Bible because it seemed too distant and irrelevant, and those who had read the Bible so much that it had become an old hat. Pastor Peterson parishioners. What was this? Oh, never mind. I overread the quote. Yeah, they just wanted to connect with Scripture on a more, what's the word?
Visceral.
Common way.
A more visceral level,
More
a
visceral
more
level?
emotional level.
I like it.
Do you think it mistranslates anything? Like by mistranslates, it like it misses large, because we've talked about how it's a paraphrase. It takes general ideas of how Eugene Peterson and the people that he had it, like he would send it to people to have them check it. It's not like he just wrote it one day and sent it out.
Yeah, it took 10
there
years.
was rigor. Like it is an actual Bible paraphrase. It's not just some notes. Are there any sections that you think or that you can tell, because he did do this like thought for thought thing, that because it's mostly his idea that he gets across the wrong idea in his phrases?
So this came under some scrutiny in like 2017, I believe.
Okay.
He made some comments that in some ways affirmed LGBT.
Okay.
There was some stuff with having gay parishioners. That was the point. And he had been talking about this, and it seemed like he was becoming somewhat affirmative. So then this caused some people to go back and read through the message and look at the different ways that he handled verses specifically talking about homosexuality.
Right.
I thought he did a really good job. Like, I thought that, like, as far as translating, I would say on par with ESV. I think the verses are fairly clear. There was one verse, though, that really stuck out as not being quite the same. And let me find it for you. So it's actually 1 Corinthians 6, 9 to 10, when it talks about those who will not inherit the kingdom of heaven.
Oh, yeah.
So in the ESV, it goes, "Do not be deceived, neither by sexual immorality, nor idolaters, nor adulterers, nor men who practice homosexuality, nor thieves, nor greedy, nor drunkards, nor revelers, nor swindlers will inherit the kingdom of God." Okay. Sorry for my reading of that, but now we'll get into the Message version of this. "Those who use and abuse each other, use and abuse sex, use and abuse the earth and everything in it, don't qualify as citizens in the kingdom of God."
Right. That is a lot more vague.
It's a lot more vague, and it does not
Leaves out swindlers for some reason.
leaves out swindlers and use and abuse the earth and everything in it. Feels a little bit like a modern day lovey-dovey, don't pollute kind of thing.
You think so?
Yeah. It also sounds like the most vague way of saying anyone who does anything wrong.
But at
Yeah,
the same
it's just-
time,
Yeah, a catch-all
Yeah.
term. A little too vague.
if
Yeah.
you read like Leviticus, it's
Right. All the other ones that people tend to.
he still
Because-
uses the word abhorrent and abomination, and like he uses all the ones that people get mad about. So it feels nitpicky,
Right.
to go back 15 years into his translational career and say, hey, at this time you were setting the foundation for the beliefs that you have now. And if you look at the people that actually read through and approved some of the Message, you get very common names that we brought up on the podcast a lot, like Tremper Longman was part of that.
Yeah.
John Walton was also on the Old Testament committee. There was actually a guy named William Griffin, and I wasn't sure who he was at first, but turns out there's a Catholic version of the Message Bible that came out in 2013. So the Deuterocanonical books have also been translated.
That's
into
awesome.
The Message
I didn't
Bible.
know that.
Yeah.
Super cool.
I need to read those.
You're going to have things like there's certain passages where, depending on how you see one phrase, whether it connects to the next verse or the previous. So, like every translation has to make a call in Ephesians 1:4, whether or not they see the phrase "in love," the previous verse, whether verse 4 or verse 5. It's the whole. So, starting in verse 4, it's I'm reading ESV. Even as he has chose us in him before the foundation of the world, that we should be holy and blameless before him.
in love.
Well, that's the
Right.
question. Is that sentence, or is it in love he predestined us for adoption in him?
Right.
Blah, 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 blah. And you'll see every translation kind of has to make a call on whether the in love goes before or after.
Right. Which sentence is a part of?
Yeah. And so you'll have people that really lose their mind over stuff. There's going to be stuff in every translation that we bring up. There'll be binary things like that.
No, there won't be, because the King James Version is
Decides it, because that's when God.
Of course. He authorized, of
Yes. Yeah. That's true. Thank you for pointing
authorized
that out.
capital A
I-
by the Lord.
I slipped that up, despite the fact that we can't find a written document of it saying it's authorized, which is funny to me. It just says it's
The
authorized.
king
and everybody's
says
like,
so,
"Oh."
so yes.
But we can't find a decree. That's the whole point. We
Oh,
can't
it's the
find
other
the
way
king's
around.
decree.
Oh,
It's just any point.
that's
It's
funny.
its own decree.
And point being
Yeah.
that
The message
you're gonna
makes-
find in every translation or paraphrase or whatever, you're going to find where one reading goes one way.
Yep.
And so to answer like Colton's question in general,
Yeah.
Depending on where you land on some of those issues, you're going to say, well, Eugene Peterson got it wrong, or the Amplified got it wrong, or whatever. And so there'll be issues like that all the time.
And Joel, to slightly transition, I really like the Message version for some of it, like you said, some of its wordings.
Yeah.
However, there's a reason why people have a very strong opinion on this version. And a lot of it has to do with the people who use it, right? Less so about Eugene Peterson and whether or not he translates well or not, and more about the type of people who use it, right?
Yes, so they would fall
Specifically liberal Christians.
on the extreme version of dynamic equivalence. They just are fine with changing the Bible as much as you need to make it palatable. Rather, like, what's the point of understanding the Bible if it's not actually saying what the Bible says? You know?
Sure.
Like, it's not better to have, like, you know, oh, I understand this passage now. Unfortunately, it only tells me the recipe for Rice Krispies or whatever, right? Like, it's not a real passage in the Bible.
Sounds like a pretty good Bible.
Yeah, it's not great.
Delicious.
So, like, I get it. I did find quite a few scholars, actually, that were like, you know what? I'll use it in my sermons, right? And maybe I'm showing my hand a little bit too much, but my dad uses the Message Bible, like when he preaches. Not to quote from, but I know for a fact that his Bible that he's had since I was a little kid is NIV, and then the Message on the other side. So I think the appropriate use of the Message Bible is to accompany a more word-for-word translation. I think that it works really well alongside one, because we're not saying Eugene Peterson is not a scholar and an academic. I think that part of his appeal was that he was also a pastor and an author, right? I think that people liked how pragmatic he was, rather than just being all head knowledge. You know, he was actually part of a church. I believe one of his churches he held for 29 years.
Yeah.
Which is like, okay, you put in the time, man. Like, you are a pastor. Like, we're not going to like say just because we don't like your transliteration or your paraphrase, that you aren't doing the work of God. So,
and his book, The Pastor, that memoir that he wrote, is a good book.
I've only heard good things about it.
I haven't read it.
There are some stellar quotes on like how to be a pastor in there. What, like,
is that the one that you read, that you covered on the podcast a little while ago, or is that Timothy Keller's?
Timothy Keller's.
Okay.
Yeah. A Pastor is Eugene Peterson's memoir about like his like becoming a pastor, and then like the stuff from being a pastor. He was in one of our pastoral theology classes.
Okay.
Yeah.
With the Message, at least, the main experiences I've had are from people who use it at Bible college, which I was a little upset about. Or back when I used to, lead one of the Bible studies, there was one person who would come and would always bring a Message Bible and would always advocate themselves to be the one who read it, because they were like, they wouldn't like me reading the Bible. They wouldn't like anyone else reading the Bible. They got very upset, not very upset like openly, but very like about whatever. If we read the Bible, she would be like, I want to read it. The Message just puts in such a good way, all this. And then she'd read something. I'm like, I feel like this misses like half of the point.
Yeah.
Not because it's a bad translation, but simply because when doing a Bible study or something like that, it gets into the same thing with the Amplified, where you're going to get lost in the weeds going over every little definition. This has the opposite problem if it doesn't talk about the Bible enough, if you're doing a Bible study, in my opinion.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things you have to talk about with like certain phrasings. You're reading the ESV and you're reading through Ephesians, you're going to have a lot to say about like every single verse. Whereas with this one, you're going to say about how it makes you feel, but you can't really have a deep theological discussion over what.
I'm going to advocate for 2 seconds.
Yeah.
Okay.
One of the things that the Message may do, it streamlines the entire theological conversation to what is the point of this entire pericope? What is he trying to say in that?
Pericope.
Pericope being that chunk of scripture pertaining to that subject.
Okay. I actually didn't know what that word meant.
Okay. And rather than getting lost in the weeds about, let's say, where is the phrase in love in verse 4, verse 5, and then just what does that mean?
Right.
Is he's trying to streamline the process for the person reading it.
Sure.
Getting them to understand it in their own vernacular. and then get them to really understand what Paul's trying to say, or what David's trying to express in a more holistic chunk of scripture, rather than like getting down into the weeds of what each verse. And here's the thing. I think what you're saying gets to the heart of the problem that I find that I've experienced, at least with the Message, which actually isn't the problem with the book. Generally speaking, it has been favored by people who don't like to do word studies, who don't like to try to figure out the grammar of a specific Bible verse and go, what is Paul trying to say in his run-on sentence, and diagram about the relationship between multiple of his like little branch off points in the middle of a sentence, and how, all that's connected, and holy moly. They're almost to the degree where they're antagonistic to that level of biblical study.
Yeah.
And that's the problem that I've run into with, again, not the Message, the people who advocate the Message so heavily.
Yes.
Yeah.
I agree.
I think that's more a tool being used badly than it is a bad tool.
Totally.
So like, I get that. I get that it's favored by the less, almost anti-intellectual crowd of biblical study. But at the same time, if you're going to read through Psalms, I don't know how much of that you need and how much you just
Psalms,
want to.
absolutely, yeah.
You think you would absolutely need it in Psalms?
No,
Psalms would be.
I think it's beautiful. I think the message of Psalms with the Message is beautiful.
Well, I think even the attempt to restore some of the poetic nature in Psalms is a great thing. Why he started with the Beatitudes, not quite sure. Because to me, the methodology makes more sense in a narrative or a psalm.
Yep.
I think what makes sense about the Beatitudes is so many people don't know what it means to be like poor of spirit.
Okay.
Like that phrase
gets lost on us sometimes.
It gets lost on us. And there's a bunch of that in the Beatitudes, that getting that more dynamic translation into what does it culturally mean. Same thing with, like you're saying in the Psalms, what does it mean to be, what is it that restores my soul in the modern day versus to a Hebrew person?
Yeah.
What is that? Yeah.
Right. And with the hyper modern language and phrasing and stuff, makes it so easy for people to get in and fall in love with how the Bible sounds.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I will say though, I do think that, okay, this might be coming off as a little strong, and I'm sure we'll have a different understandings of like who's to blame for stuff like this, but the Message attracts a certain kind of person who reads it. Now, not everyone who reads it, usually the not vocal people tend to just do it, and it's like, I think it sounds nice, and I'm like, sure, yeah, that's fine. But the type of people who advocate for it openly, who want to read it and want other people to read it, tend to be people like you talked about the anti-intellectual crowd. I do think it's largely that, but also, I don't know. I just think that the kind of person, I think that the way it's written attracts that kind of person. And that's not Peterson's fault because he didn't intend that, but I think that's what it's become. And that's why I tend to distance myself from it.
Well, I think I understand those people a little bit. And if you listen to our last one, same thing with the NLT, is that sometimes reading a different translation will actually make your biblical reading, like just your day-to-day reading, feel a lot more alive. You'll read passages in ways you didn't read them before because they weren't written that way before, right? So good luck doing KJV every day of your life, right? Like I've got people I really respect because every year they decide to pick up a new translation and read it cover to cover. And like, that's how they do their Bible study. And like, I get that. If you are in a rut with your biblical
Keeps
reading,
it a little fresh.
I would recommend something like a paraphrase that makes it a little more palatable. And you know what? If you're reading Old Testament narrative, you might be fine just to read it.
Yeah.
As is. Like when it was first published, it was published without its chapter numbers and verse. Like it was published as a reader's Bible. The whole point is to mix up the way you read the Bible and inspire people that have been reading for a long time to maybe read it in a different way. I don't think Peterson was trying to target people who just didn't read the Bible.
I agree.
I think he was just trying to
it attracts that kind of
bring freshness. Like there's this There's this quote here of when he started the sermon. Let me see. He goes, "I kind of just like to let go and become playful. And that was when the Sermon of the Mount started. I remember I was down in my basement study and I did the Beatitudes in about 10 minutes. And all of a sudden I realized that it could work." Okay. So what he did was he just sat down and tried to read the Bible in a way that he hadn't before and wrote it down. And I respect that. Unfortunately, this was quoted by somebody who did not like what he was doing and said that he was not rightly dividing the word of truth. It gets really messy. A lot of people who start translations like this, the message actually got off pretty good because it became popular really early on. But when you look at like the NLT stuff that was happening at the same time, you're talking like death threats. Like people were angry, right? Not a lot of people love new translations of the Bible, especially when they don't even try to adhere to the current norms of translation.
Right.
I know.
Well, they'll just focus on the controversial things and then make an opinion based on that.
Yeah.
Usually.
Yeah.
Anyways.
And the endorsement of the message from this group as a beautiful, useful tool is also the measure of that is also don't quote it as this is what the Bible has said in this verse.
Mm-hmm.
It's useful, like you were saying, as that secondary.
That's pretty harsh.
Well, I think that's what those people would say.
Yeah, I think it's also what Eugene said.
Mm-hmm.
That it's
you're on first name terms. That's awesome, dude.
We're academics. We call them by their last name, Josh.
Sorry, it's also what Peterson said, not to confuse
Jordan
it with
Peterson?
not to confuse it with Jordan Peterson.
Oh, Jordan said that?
It was not meant as a thing you would quote as this is what the Bible has written.
Yep. Nor should it be.
But
I'm I thought I was more critical than you guys were on this. I'm not a big fan of the message. And it's not because it's not beautiful. I think it is. I feel like I need to distance myself from it.
Why?
Enough.
Why?
Yeah.
Mostly because of the people who use it.
I just see it as a red flag when someone brings it up.
I also don't think that the beauty that's found in the way it's phrased, I wouldn't recommend it to anybody. That's the problem.
Really? Okay.
No, I don't think so.
I wouldn't either.
I don't think it makes up for the lack, which is it's missing a lot of context. It's missing a lot of ideas. Not because it's not there, but because I think that those original words are just better. Even if it's in English. I know it's not technically the original because it's in Greek or Hebrew, but
you've done the pre-reading that makes reading a more word-for-word translation not only understandable, but you can see some of the beauty behind it.
I had the same opinion before I went to Bible college.
But that's because you wanted to have done the pre-reading.
Yeah, fair enough.
I don't know. I think I know people that would be careful how I say this. They won't listen to this.
Uh-oh.
They're related to me. Who would only read the message. Not because they're not necessarily intelligent. Because they don't read. I said I need to be careful. Because they don't read. Because it's not easy for them.
Yep.
They are non-Christian, but they would sit down and read the message. And I think there's more people like that than we think.
Would you say it's better as an evangelical tool than as a as someone who's already Christian?
It's not a doctrinal tool, and it shouldn't be used as such. But just because of the I guess
be used for evangelism more than anything else.
Yes, especially in the fact that our culture is not readers. Like, yeah.
I saw some people saying it was for a 4.5 grade reading level, and I thought that was just because it's not part of his methodology that he wanted it to be that. I think that's just kind of rude.
Yeah. But the literacy rates are in the toilet.
Yeah.
And so I think that should come into effect with how we think we should use this tool.
Sure.
Yeah. I don't know.
Right. I agree with that.
Yeah.
Well, we've spent some good time on the Message Bible. And I think we've landed at what's a rating for the Bible? Are we still doing ratings for Bibles?
We didn't for...
We did for Amplified.
Yeah, we did. Prince Amplified.
We did Prince Amplified. So between KJV and the Queen
4 or
JV,
5 out of 10, right?
Yours is something.
Mine is
a message was sent.
No, mine's the Court Jester, dude.
Nice.
Court Jester JV.
If I had
This
to
ranking is going down the toilet.
if I had to rate the message based off of like it as a book, I'd probably give it like something like a 6 or a 7. If I had to rate it, but then I have every other translation of the Bible and it goes down to like a 3.
Every other?
Okay. Fair enough.
Every other
Fair
translation?
enough. Okay, maybe
Wait till you
4.
get what I've got.
You got it. Yeah. All right. You're right. You're right. There's a lot of really bad ones out there.
Okay. Speaking of bad ones.
Speaking of straight heretical.
Speaking of damnable heresy.
So this is controversial because
we're talking about the ones that Josh wrote, right?
This is controversial
Yes, that
because
I myself wrote.
It's actually heretical, right?
Well, yeah.
Welcome to the new world.
So
The brave
I
new
wanted
world.
to try to get into this before we brought it up. Has anyone
Witness
heard of the
me.
New World Translation? Most people probably haven't heard of it, even though it's one of the most printed Bibles in the world. You know why?
Because they give them away for free.
Yeah. It's because it's the JW's Bible, the Jehovah's Witnesses translation. So before we get into that,
What's your favorite verse? Knock and the door shall be opened. Okay, that's the first joke.
That was good.
I get it. That's funny.
Thank you.
No one at home's going to get it.
They're gonna get that.
Well, they won't get it if they're not at home.
Or if they had a JW visit the door before.
Yeah.
Anyway, New World Translation is a fairly new translation, although it was written technically in the 60s. It was written as small itty bitties. I almost said itty bitty unironically.
Itty bitty
Small itty bitty.
It's just an
little
itty bitty
books.
translation. Itty bitty sections.
It was
What was that?
released as one volume in 1961. So not that new, but compared to ASV, it's new. And it was written by a translation committee. Don't talk about it yet. This committee is said, they formed in 1947 by the Watchtower Society. Sorry.
The
Which
guardians
are
of
the-
all truth. Don't you know?
Exactly. They're the ones in charge of the Jehovah's Witnesses stuff.
Yeah.
They committed them. They all like laid hands on them. They did all the normal Bible translation stuff.
I don't know if that's normal Bible translation stuff.
Are you sure?
Laying on hands?
I actually have no idea.
I would do it.
That's a good point. I have no idea.
I would do it. I just wouldn't expect it.
And they wrote this Bible and they translated it and they did all that and released it together in 1961.
Wow.
There is one big issue that a lot of people have, including myself. We have They released it anonymously.
Anonymously?
Thank you so much. Anyway,
With anonymity.
that's the word I'm looking for.
Clownfish. Continue.
What? Anatomy?
That was good.
All right, Nemo. The watch.
Anonymity.
So none of the none of the members were ever named. Not directly. Why
Say Finding Nemo.
Well, they
Stop it.
Why would they do that? Why wouldn't they list who translated it there, Colton?
Well, they say that it was because they wanted all of the glory to go to God and not to the people who did it, which to me is a very obvious cover for we don't want you to know we don't want you to criticize the people who made it. Sorry, I'm coming out. I'm trying to be as generous as I can
Why?
Why? Because I want to crush people's hopes after they think this could be good. Okay.
Okay.
No, sorry.
It sounds good.
So Jehovah's Witnesses, the strong stance of the podcast is that they are full blown heretics, which I don't think is uncommon or wrong.
Because
Yeah.
it's true.
Yeah, exactly. But like Mormons,
You Arianists.
However, if there are any Jehovah's Witness listening to this podcast or Mormons, we
Send
would
us a
love to
message.
talk
Or
to you.
Mormons.
Just
I'm
we
sure there's
lump
a
you
couple.
together.
but
Actually, email us. We'll have a full dialogue with you.
yes,
For real.
there's a point. We did find out some of the people who were involved in it. I don't actually know how, but I think it was some Catholics who did. I can't remember.
Nice.
You tell me the Catholics sent in people to find the Watchtower
Inquisition,
Society?
yeah.
Some
What-
Jesuit priests went undercover.
Yeah, they wore the red clothes and the Inquisition garb and everything. Yeah.
Well, they weren't expecting them.
Cool.
Yeah. Well, no one expects it.
The Vatican v Watchtower? Cool.
That's awesome.
They
Can
do.
we make that movie?
It's like a wizard duel.
They do kind of have. So, like in the Catholic authority, like the Pope has so much crazy authority,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And like kind of sets the rules, but there's like more soft rules around it.
JW.
Well, here's part of the problem. JWs are like, the Catholic system's evil. Okay. But then at the same time, their Watchtower Society has more authority than the magisterial in Romanism.
Their Watchtower Society also functions like what you're saying, where with anonymity, where it's like as like the inner church Illuminati.
Yeah, no, for real.
Yeah. Anyway, these people, we've learned some of them. Turns out none of them had a degree in any Bible translation stuff. Only one of them had taken 2 years. Where is his name? I don't know. I can't find his name. Friedrich Franz.
Just listed them. Say it, Liz.
Friedrich
Are we-
Franz.
Are we
calling you
DDoSing
out.
this guy?
Yeah.
DDoS? I don't think that's the right word. We're doxing is the word you're looking for. And we are not.
His
We are not.
address
This
is.
No, this is his name is
Watchtower.
public. But Frederick Franz, had 2 years of Greek learning. That, as far as I'm aware, wasn't biblical Greek. I think it's actually like modern day Greek. I'm not sure though. It could be classical Greek. I'm not entirely sure.
I would guess it's classical Greek and not Koine Greek.
Koine, yeah, which
But-
is what the Bible's written in.
Yeah.
The New Testament. But he only had 2 years and he never actually graduated. So these people tend to be considered not very good at their job.
You mean if he's the most qualified?
Yes. And it explains a couple of things. However, before we get into that, I would like to talk about more of like the actual structure of the book before we get into why it's bad. But first of all, the Old and New Testament aren't called the Old and New Testament. This is a JW thing. I didn't know this before I actually read it. They called the Old Testament the Hebrew Aramaic scriptures and the New Testament Christian Greek scriptures.
Also in Aramaic.
No.
Christian Greek scriptures, which is weird. I don't know why they put Christian before the Greek, but either way, sorry, give me
Okay.
a second.
Sure.
That's so weird.
They do this because they feel that Old Testament and New Testament are a misunderstanding of 2 Corinthians 3:14, which goes, "But their minds were made dull, for to this day the same veil remains when the Old Covenant, Old Testament, is read. It has not been removed because only in Christ is it taken away." Old Covenant means Old Testament. And so they think that because of this verse, that's a misunderstanding of that and that we shouldn't call the Old Testament the Old Testament, that we should call it the Greek, Hebrew, or the Hebrew Aramaic scriptures, which that's a mouthful.
It's a mouthful and also is only talking about a people group and not a religion, which is odd.
If that's the case, then it's not even holy
That's fair.
scriptures. So it's just generic writings. So the
Yeah.
Apocrypha should be in there.
Yes, you'd think. But yeah, no, it's I don't know. JWs have a weird thing with some of this stuff. I actually don't know why they believe this. I just think that it has to do with you know how we have the whole in a lot of low churches, what's dispensationalism?
Yep.
It's like anti-dispensationalism in the other way.
Huh.
And I think that's why they do this, because they believe that it's okay. Well, I'll get into it a little bit. They believe that the Old Testament, that the law, there's a curse on everyone because of the law, a special curse, and that is lifted by Christ dying on a stake,
Mhm.
not a cross,
Mhm.
which we'll get into. But
We don't have to.
no, we're not going to get into the theological things, but rather this is supposed to show why that the JWs translate these things. And it's because they have a doctrinal statement first and then a translation statement in the second. They translate based off of what they believe, not the other way around. They don't believe things based off the translation.
Because they grew out of, I believe, Methodism, wasn't it? And then they
Probably,
had
I
a
don't know.
Bible study. And then the Bible study kind
Really?
of, started to kind of feed itself its own doctrine.
Hmm.
And they got weird stuff about the ending of Daniel where it says Michael will be a prince. And then they're like, well, that's Jesus. And then it gets really weird and construed.
Oh, you guys know
I
a lot
think
more
it's
about
Michael.
it. I learned a lot. I actually knew pretty much nothing about Jehovah's Witnesses before I did this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I learned a whole lot. I don't know much about their origins, but that's fascinating.
They're wild.
Yeah, they're not. Yeah.
The one of the big translation differences that we have in our Bibles that the New World Translation has in theirs is Jehovah.
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
You'll get this in a lot of actually some ASV, I think. It was very
That
popular
makes sense.
around late 1800s to early 1900s.
Turn of the 20th century.
Yeah.
Who wants to explain what Jehovah is?
Joel.
Okay, I'll do
It's
it.
your favorite.
So you know how we have God's name, but we didn't want to write it down all the way because we didn't want to be disrespectful.
We?
I'm saying we, God's people,
Fair enough.
that we learned
the Hebrews.
God's name, and then because we didn't want to write it down in its entirety, because we didn't want to be disrespectful, we forgot how to say it. And then so the Hebrew language took
Tetragrammaton.
the Tetragrammaton, which is the 4 letters making up Yahweh.
Yep.
However you want to say that.
Consonants.
Which is maybe how it's said and maybe not. It's
Take
kind of
out
the
the
best guess
vowels.
scenario. But we call it the Tetragrammaton to avoid saying it for those who don't want to say Yahweh.
I'll say
Um,
Yahweh.
Yeah. So what happens is then you have the word Adonai used in the Old Testament for Lord. And because they didn't want to accidentally say Yahweh, they actually put the vowel markings from the Hebrew word Adonai onto the Tetragrammaton to avoid accidentally saying it. And so you get something that is like Jehovah, because there's no J in Hebrew.
Right.
Which is why my name is Yol in Hebrew. Yeah.
But like a lot
Is that a
That's true. That's
rough
true. And
understanding of it?
Jews knew this for forever.
Yeah.
And then Christians, even in the late medieval age, during the Renaissance, were like, "Oh, it's Jehovah."
Yeah.
And then the
that's
Jews
his
were like,
actual name.
but it's not though. And then the Christians were like, "No, but it is."
Yeah.
That's his actual name. And
Yeah,
now we
and
know it.
And then it's
Yeah.
it's just dumb.
The forbidden
no.
knowledge.
Which
Anyway.
that's what gets you, man.
Yeah. If you think you know something that nobody else knows, you become insufferable. And then you go door to door.
Oh, hang on.
And here's the thing, Jehovah's Witnesses are awesome people, and they have a really good evangelism team. They love
They just
being out
evangelized
there.
the wrong thing.
And here's the thing I learned pretty recently. You have to do an hour a month, I believe, something like that, of outreach, or else you're
Really?
not considered a publishing member.
Really?
I don't know why they call it publishing member, but the Watchtower Society will take your name off of a list at their organization if you don't.
They have
log
a
in
very
an hour.
rigorous tally. I actually,
Yes.
I didn't save it.
They're
because
also
I didn't think it was
instructed
relevant.
not to Google JWs.
Wait, is that list the list of 144,000 people
I'm
that are
pretty
going
sure it's related to that, but it's blown way past 144,000.
They have 8 million. They have over 8.5 million people.
Their
As
eschatology
registered.
has changed multiple times in the same way that the New World Translation has had multiple updates to further increase its doctrine.
Yes. Well, that's the thing. Most translations that we read nowadays are going to be like 2013 onwards, but it's gone through many different types. There's unreleased translations, some very strange ones that added some weird stuff because of controversies that were going on and then removed later on. So if you've been handed one before or given one or something, it might not be current, might not be up to date to what they believe right now. It's also going to be very confusing for some people. But where it uses in the Old Testament, the Tetragrammaton, it uses Jehovah instead. I don't think I say Yahweh because I think that is the more accurate, even though I haven't done the full study into it. It seems that most Greek scholars or Hebrew scholars tend to go that way.
Yeah.
As far as I'm aware, all of them do.
Yeah. There's going to be a few
It's standardized,
outliers.
right? But
Yeah.
it's
But-
still, we don't know exactly.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
just one of those.
That's the
things.
educated guess.
And fair enough. If you want to translate Jehovah because you built your name Jehovah's Witnesses and you don't want to change it, fine, whatever.
I don't think that's why they did that, but yeah.
I know, but imagine them changing
They still
it now.
believe that's what it is.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
but-
they don't go, oh, but we understand that there's a miscommunication. No, they demand
yeah,
that that's what it is.
I know. I just think it's funny. I think that they do it because of the name. But in the New Testament, they do the same, except with Theos and Kyrios, Lord and God.
Mm.
They translate as Jehovah as well.
which is not really a translation. You're just putting a different word there.
Yeah.
What about when they call other people other than Christ or?
Well, they still translate
God.
that as Lord.
Oh, yep. So it's only when I see.
Yeah. Well, before we do, what do you think the reason for doing this would be? Since we understand JW doctrine a little bit.
Well, I like that you pointed out that their method of translation is doctrine, then text.
Always.
Which makes sense. It helps to understand where they're coming from.
Yep.
They really wouldn't want you to ever to think that Christ is divine. That's for sure.
That could be the reason.
Because then he is never referred to as Lord.
God or Lord properly. Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. He is Lord in a different way. However, when they translate it as Jehovah, they're making a claim about God, not about Jesus. Yeah. So for the New Testament, that's why they're specifically taking this word.
Yeah.
However, as annoying as that is, there is one thing I really liked about this translation. The one thing I don't see in any other translations, however, I think it's for a good reason, is that they take, so for people at home who don't know much about language, when we say the word you, I could be talking to you, Josh, directly, or I could be talking about you, the podcast members. I'm using the same word, but I'm either talking first person or a second person to Josh, or a second person plural to everyone, and we use the same word. However, in most translations of the Bible, they'll just say you, and then they might put a footnote saying this is talking to the congregation of believers, or this is talking to Timothy specifically, or something like that. However, the New World Translation puts the small little capital letters if it's plural. It's talking about a group of people. And to me, that makes that a little bit easier to read without having to read every single note and every single thing about it every time. There is one issue with it. And that's because the same capital letters that are used here are usually used for Lord in the Old Testament. Those I can't remember what you call it. The small uppercase letters, they do instead of like Yahweh or the Tetragrammaton in the Old Testament. Usually they'll put Lord in full capital letters, but small. These are the same ones. And so if it's going to say you in small capital letters, it might get a little confusing since you is also referred to as God sometimes, like if you're talking to God. So I think this Bible, because it uses, instead of using the Tetragrammaton, it uses Jehovah. They can use the capitals for you instead. And I like it
ridiculous
for that reason, but I understand why other Bibles don't do it.
Well, that's an issue with the English language, not really translation.
Yeah, exactly.
Because we used to have one. Yeah. We used to have a word for that.
Yeah.
It was thou, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thy, thou. Yeah.
Well, we haven't even covered the definite article.
No. Now that we've talked a little bit about it, what do you guys think? Do you think this is a good translation of the Bible?
No, I think it's a terrible translation. Yes. I think that if you think about your doctrine before you think about your text, it's a bad translation.
Yep. Well, this is where the doctrine really comes into effect, because we've talked a bit about like where it's come from and a couple of things. However, the thing that most people know this translation by is that it's a JW Bible, and it has many, many things wrong with it. Many, many things. There are so many parts of its own translation that it mistranslates on purpose. They are very, you know how last week we talked about things like the NLT or the ESV, where they're like, we want to be as accurate word for word or accurate phrase for phrase or whatever it is as possible. These guys say the same thing, that they're going back to the original text. That's why they call it, that's why they say they call it the Hebrew Aramaic scriptures, because it wasn't called the Old Testament, stuff like that. They want to be as accurate. That's why they say Jehovah, even though it's a mistranslation, but they think that's the more accurate original thing. They do that with a few things. That's why there's some weird texts in here, but there are some mistranslated passages that are clearly simply because of doctrinal issues. The first one is the torture stake. There is no mention of the cross anywhere in the Christian Greek scripture. I'm not calling it that. The New Testament. Yeah. In this, they don't say crucifix. They don't say cross. They say torture stake, and there are a few reasons for this. JWs don't believe that Jesus died on the cross, but on a single tree spoke, like a spear, which, I mean, we've talked about it a little bit. We've talked about it a little bit before, that might be the more accurate.
No.
No?
The word can mean that. It doesn't appear anywhere that Romans crucified people like that. The evidence of crucifixions that we see in that area are more akin to capital T's. Like a capital T.
Yeah.
And the earliest depictions mocking Christians, so there's some graffiti artwork of a horseman being crucified, is a depiction of
horseman.
Yeah, well, it's a graffiti mocking Christians in Rome. That's like, I think it's like early, like second century. Might be late first century, and it does depict a cap. I think it depicts what the modern understanding of like the small lowercase t.
Yep.
But either way, it's not really one way or the other. The word can mean both, if my memory's right. I don't know if somebody wants to correct me, but there's no real reason to think that.
Well, and we also know from historical references that because of the relationship with the Israelites, there were things that Rome did that were uncommon in the area.
Yep.
Yes.
And so, yeah.
There is a fair chance that he was crucified on a cross historically. Maybe I'm mixing up with the Assyrians. Did the Assyrians tend to do it on the single tree?
They had the stake, but that was a different thing.
That was a gallows.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, they also had the one where they would
maybe I'm giving them JWs too much.
The
credit.
Assyrians would do the one where they would put the spike in the ground and then put it underneath your rib cage and then slowly up your mouth.
Among other places.
Anyways, we talked about that in our Nahum episode.
Raising stakes.
Okay, I gave the JWs a little too much credit.
You never want to do that. Never
I know, right?
An inch.
But they believe he was died on a single tree, and one of the reasons for this is because of there's the belief that there is a special curse put on humanity because of the way my writing, because it can only be removed. Their curse can only be removed because Jesus died at the stake and not on a cross.
Wow.
Yeah.
Let's just further force feed our lying. Anyway.
Wow. Okay.
I was about to lose
Caleb
my mind
doesn't
there,
like that.
It's just so wrong.
Yeah.
Oh,
Caleb's had a fair amount of dialogue with Jehovah's Witnesses.
Can I share my silver bullet for how to fight JWs?
Only after we go over to the definite article thing, which is their biggest thing.
I'm waiting for that. Yes. I'm fine with doing that at the end.
Because I think we can all agree this is annoying, but it's not really the end of the world. But then they get into the hell doesn't exist.
Okay.
So they do not translate Gehenna, Sheol, Hades, or Tartarus, or any of these things as hell. None of them. And some Bibles will go with like the actual word. They'll put Gehenna or they'll put Tartarus instead of hell because they think like King James does hell for all of them.
Yeah.
I think NIV splits them up. I can't remember.
You'll see Gehenna.
Yeah. However, this just all puts them as either the resting place or just death or something like that. Place? Yeah, because for Sheol, they believe it's a unconscious resting place before you're brought before judgment.
An unconscious resting place?
Yes. Don't get into it.
There's no difference than just grave then.
Yeah. They believe that they're unconscious or that they're in some kind of transient, unaware state. Some of them have gone full annihilationism or universalism.
Okay.
That because they believe that is the main reason is because they believe death is the punishment that all people must do before they can ascend into heaven. So that by everyone dying and going to Sheol or Hades or whatever this is, aka just dying, they have already been justified and can come to God.
Oh.
Kind of. Some of them don't go that far as I'm aware. I didn't get super into the doctrine of the JWs because we're not here to talk about them, but it is important because they then remove all mentions of hell and just translate as some different word like death.
Yeah.
Which is just wrong, right?
Yeah, that's wrong because I mean, I can't even argue that you should translate all of those as hell.
Yep.
Right? Like it's hard to say that the ideas of Hades and Gehenna and Sheol are properly. Yeah, we talked about this already.
In the King James stuff. The King James references them all as hell, and it's a problem.
Yes. But the answer is not to just mistranslate them as death.
Well, yeah, that's the wrong answer
Especially
for
when
sure.
Thanatos would have been what is death? And
Whoa, careful.
Thanatos.
Careful.
Isn't it?
We're using
It is
yes.
Thanatos.
Okay.
Careful. We're using actual words.
One of the
I
words
thought it was
for
a
death.
Marvel character.
Yeah. It's a Marvel character. Okay, one thing, and then we'll get into the John 1:1. But
Good.
they do not believe that Jesus is God. They don't believe that Jesus is God. They don't believe in the Trinity.
They're just Arianists.
They're more than Arianists, but yes, that is one of their big issues.
No, I'm trying to put them as low as possible, so they're just Arianists.
I think they're worse than Arianists.
Arian on the side of caution.
Because, yes, I agree. They believe that Jesus is a created being. Sort of angel in flesh, kind of, but I don't know.
Pretty angel. Like he's Michael.
But he's also like human who took on.
He's one of the golden arches, as far as I know.
Yeah, whatever. It doesn't matter. I don't want to get into their theology. We can have an whole episode about that. But yes, one of the things is that they mistranslate things like Colossians 1:16. They make all things were made by Jesus is the original translation. They say all other things were created by Jesus, implying that he's a created being. All of these things, just little tweaks here and there, little tweaks.
Yeah.
All Trinity passages are changed, including the very beginning of the Bible, Genesis 1:1-2, where instead of it says the Spirit of God hovered above the waters, it says it's God's active force was above the waters. Yeah.
God's active force. Is that how they refer to the Spirit?
Yeah, they don't. They don't believe in a personified Holy Spirit.
Yep.
It's just
no
a
Trinity
force.
Just Jehovah God.
Cool.
And John 14:10 changes God being in Jesus and Jesus being in God to being in union. Like they're in union with each other. That being like that they're union in
they have a relationship.
Will, I think, but not in divinity is the idea. Again, just further obfuscation of the idea. Hebrews 1:6 translates angels to worshiping Jesus to obseisance, which means obeisance. I can't say that word, which means to honor. Yes, which means to honor him. They honor him. They don't worship him. And Hebrews 1:1-8 says the throne that Jesus is the throne, O God. To God is your throne. Jesus has the throne of God, and that God is the throne that Jesus sits on. I don't know. It's weird.
That is
rather than he is the God who sits on the throne. Anyway, all this to be said, all these little tweaks, these tiny little bits, just small words in some ways, like removing hell and changing it with the death or whatever. That's pretty big, but changing like other or adding active force are just little tweaks to reestablish this idea that they have about divinity. But the big one we've all been waiting for is John 1:1. John 1:1 is in the beginning was the Word was God, and the Word was with God. Word was with God, and Word was God is how it's supposed to be translated. However, the JWs translate it as in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was a God, a divine being.
And they have lowercase g.
Yes, a divine being, not God, like that we would, not the Lord. And Joel, you seemed like you had something to say about that. Because
it looks as though Josh has his mouse text open. And so, Josh, seeing how you have a Greek textbook in front of you.
Yes.
And you've been very silent and very patient.
Yes.
Do you mind explaining why that's a mistranslation?
I can.
A blatant mistranslation. A cover-up, if you will.
And I'll explain why somebody like myself would make this mistake, because I have about the same educational value. Like, I have the same amount of time of education in Greek as Boyo. So
you have more by about a year and a half, don't you?
I have 2 years.
Okay.
Yeah. So
in Greek and Hebrew, right?
1 year in undergrad, 1 year in master.
But that's for both Greek and Hebrew. This guy was just Hebrew and 2 years.
So
Greek, but
I'm trying to hype you up, Josh.
The way it's written, I'm going to read a little bit of Greek.
Okay.
So what you get is the last part, which we translate as, and the word was God, is Kai, Theos, Ein, Ha, Logos.
Yep.
And what that translates directly is, and God was the Word.
Yes.
Now, the word logos is the word. Right before that is the word ha, and that's the.
Yep. But
the word theos, it is missing the article, the word the.
Which means, yeah.
Which generally in languages, in Greek, would be a god.
Mm-hmm.
However, that would be the case if the structure of the language wasn't written in that order. It would be that case if it was written kai ha logos ein theos.
Yes.
So that would be, and the word was a god.
There have been many hundreds of thousands of papers written on this one subject, with all of them dunking on the JWs for this translation.
Yes. And so part of it is he just simply didn't understand how Greek grammar works, in that if the object appears before the subject.
Well, the big issue is that you can translate it this way.
No, that's the thing. The grammar rules it out.
The grammar doesn't rule it out. It just leaves it. It's vague enough that it could be. It just shouldn't be.
Argue with mouse.
Yeah. So
I'm not going to argue with mouse.
But that's the textbook, though.
Yeah.
I know.
And so
it says the grammar rules it out.
And so the point he makes, however, is
that's his opinion, to be fair.
I don't think so. I think that's, as far as I've been aware, that's not just Mouse, that's multiple Greek scholars.
Yes, because he quotes Martin Luther, funny enough, in that he says that Martin Luther wrote that the structure of this Greek sentence rules out both Sabellianism and Arianism as heresies.
Okay.
If it was Sabellianism, like if Sabellianism was true, it would be written, and the word was the God. So it would add the article and flip the order. If it was Arianism, it would just flip the order. But
without the.
Okay. Yeah, but without the article, without the word the. But because it's written specifically this way, it can only, you can literally translate it falsely, but any Greek reader would never understand this to be, and the word was a god.
I didn't see that it would rule out Sabellianism like that.
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
See, that makes sense to me. Yeah.
Yeah.
However, I know he says this, and I know he's a very leading scholar and does this. When I did my study on this one passage, which I did last year, 2 years ago, I went into it pretty deep, way too long for the paper I was supposed to be writing. It is true. I do agree with him. However, there have been enough papers that have written and obfuscated the actual evidence. I could straight up be wrong just listening to their arguments too much. Maybe Mounce is just completely right. That rules it out. But as far as I was aware, because there are other passages that do have similar structure and whatever, but still is translated as a god or something like that in other ways, that is technically possible, but not recommended.
Yeah.
However, it might be stronger than that.
Well, and here's even the funny thing is, in the same sentence, the exact same verse, the guy that translated it improperly does the proper grammatical translation in the very first two words.
Yeah.
Yes.
The words "in the beginning was the word" is ein arche.
Well, there's the better argument.
In beginning. There's no the.
Yep.
And he interjects the, which is what you're supposed to do.
In a beginning.
He doesn't say in a beginning. Yeah. He says in the beginning. And so he does it correctly.
Yep. All this to be said, this translation is wrong. And it gets across this idea again, this built up idea, but very explicitly. And this is the why people focused on it. Jesus is not God to the JWs. To us, obviously, but not to the JWs. And Caleb has a silver bullet.
At least when I have given this to two JWs in the past,
they've never been able to answer.
They stopped talking to me. I am not giving this to my current JW coworker.
Probably a good idea.
Because I want them to keep talking to me so we can talk about God. So here it is. If you actually
results may vary.
Results may vary. Before we get on to the very fun translations that Josh has for us, which honestly I have been patiently waiting for this entire.
Yeah, they're pretty good.
This is going to be awesome.
I'm going to be very upset.
Okay.
Yep.
One of the great things that JW.org has on it
Yes.
apart from their garbage translation,
Yes.
is they have some resources, such as an interlineary. So
I read some of them. They're great.
yes. So Colton mentioned there's a word that they use, the obseisance,
Mhm.
which they render as like bowing down, prostrating, giving honor, right? If you were in the no, I won't make that joke. That is a word that they say. Oh, so when the disciples go and they obseance towards Jesus at the end of Matthew, that would be. Let's see here. I'm going to give you the verses. Actually,
That 27.
that would be Matthew 28,
Okay.
verse 17. Okay, so Jesus has risen. This is like during the Great Commission. Disciples, they bow before him. They
Worship him.
I cannot
They
say
prostrate
that.
themselves before them.
No.
Oh.
There's a word that Colton, not Colton.
Prostrate.
Josh, that highlighted word. Pronounce it for me in Greek, please.
Worshipped. Otherwise,
No,
understood.
in Greek.
Yeah.
In Greek.
In the
I'm getting to what it means.
proseuchano. Sorry.
Yes.
Prosnukenosis?
Oh,
Yes. Maybe.
proseuchanosin.
Yes.
Then.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So
Oh.
one of the things that you can do is you can go and use their interlineary. Okay. So if the disciples go and do that action, that verb, actually, regardless of what that means, whether it means prostrating in honor or worship
Full-blown God worship. Yeah.
Yeah.
or worship, where else is that word used? According to their own interlineary on their own website. So if you go in the same book, Matthew, at the temptation of Jesus,
Yes.
that would be Matthew. That would be Matthew 4, verse 9 and 10.
Mhm.
Satan says, hey, if you just bow down and worship me, if you, same verb, bow down and worship me, I'll give you all the kingdoms. And Jesus' reply, quoting the Old Testament, of which in that context is understood as direct worship as God.
Yep.
Jesus says, hey, in verse 10, then saying, this is in the New World Translation, then is, sorry, no, it's an interlineary, so forgive me. Jesus says, quoting Deuteronomy, it is written by the Lord God that you shall worship him alone, and you shall render to him alone sacrifices.
It just means to honor him because we
Right.
don't
So hang on.
Oh,
It
wait.
doesn't matter what that verb is. Jesus acknowledges that the Old Testament says that verb is only to God alone.
Yep.
So that verb could mean building sandcastles, but it's ruled out in the same gospel.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter what that verb means. And it's not even like it's the same root word. It's the same word.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah. And so if you really want, use those resources on jw.org.
Mhm.
I haven't got any answers.
Well, here's the thing, because I absolutely agree. How much does this doctrine actually impact the translation? The answer is all of it.
Yes.
At least the parts that matter. And from all the way from Genesis 1 to John 1 to Hebrews, all the way through Revelation. It's multiple places in Revelation. Pretty messed up. I didn't quote every single verse I had saved, but there's a lot. And
You got
all
enough
of
of
this, all of this is to show that it's not that the translation is good and used for bad purposes, but the entire translation itself has been affected by the doctrine and has put their doctrine first in the translation to make a point rather than let it speak for itself and then just mischaracterize it or something like that.
Crazy.
That's why I say they're worse than Arians.
Boo.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Are we ready, guys?
I'm actually, this is what I've been waiting for.
Okay. So we decided to put these in the controversial episodes for the controversial translations, which are the fake language translations. So fictional languages or internet languages.
So they're real languages. They're not
They're
fake.
languages you can learn and learn to speak and speak with other people
But
effectively.
are invented by like a handful of people.
But are invented by a handful of people for non actual like national purposes.
The
or
Wingding
ethnic
Bible.
purposes. Yeah.
Is that a thing?
Oh, you could, the click of a button, it could be a thing.
I want to read a Wingding Bible. That sounds awesome.
So for example, the most famous two in history so far are the Klingon and the Elvish Bible. Klingon being the language of the Klingon alien race in Star Trek, which has enough of a developed language to make a Bible translation. However, it's not complete because there are words that don't have a Klingon equivalent yet in the
You mean tabernacled isn't a word in Klingon?
Correct. And so as you read it, there will be either whole verses where they aren't there, or like every once in a while, you'll see an English word replacing it, because in the show's history, they haven't made that word yet. The first book translated in Klingon was Jonah by a man named Mark Schulson in 1994. And since then, it has become a collaborative work on a wiki that you can go see. It's called the KBT, the Klingon Bible Translation.
That's awful.
And thousands of people have actually read the Klingon Bible fully through.
Ugh.
I'm related to one, actually.
Wait, really?
Yeah. My dad's cousin's husband.
Yes. And yeah, so that's crazy.
More accurate than the New World Translation.
Yes.
Correct.
Weirdly.
A better translation for sure.
Because it is a word for word translation as effectively as it can be, because
Is it word for word?
It is as word for word as you can get between languages, being that they're not trying to mess with ideas. They're just going through each word in English and Klingon and just transferring it over.
So it's like the NASB.
Yeah. So that's cool. The other one is Elvish, Tolkien's language that he created within Lord of the Rings.
Way cooler.
This is outing
I'm
you
showing
as a
my
worst
bias.
nerd.
So
I've
here's
watched
what's
so much
cool.
Star Trek, I still think it's cooler.
So you're a nerd. What is the name of the language?
Sindarin?
No.
Kenwa.
Yes.
Yes.
So
Sindarin is the name that's given to the things, and then Kenwa is the I think I'm pronouncing that wrong.
yeah.
But that is what it's called, the specific version.
Yeah.
Because there's also black speech, but
Yes. So Kenya, the whole Elvish,
Kenya?
spelt Quenya in English.
that's why I called it Kenwa, because
Yeah.
calling it Kenya is a little confusing.
Well, and maybe it's Quenya.
Oh, you might be right.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
So it technically
I'm
it's
a bit
translated
confused,
in
sorry.
what's known as New Quenya, which is because in Lord of the Rings, if people are familiar, Rivendell and Mirkwood are different groups of elves.
Yep.
And the forest that Lady Galadriel's in, Lorien.
Lothlorien.
Yeah, they don't speak the exact
That is true. It's
language.
not super heavily emphasized in the book, but
Yeah.
there are different races of elves. Yeah.
Yes, and so they speak dialects, and so New Quenya
Stop
is a
making
unified
snoring noises. It's
language.
cool.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Is a unified language of the Elvish peoples, and it's written in that. The New Testament is complete, and the Old Testament's almost complete. It is being translated by a woman from Norway named Helga Fauskanger.
That sucks.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
That's awesome. No, if you already have a fantasy name, then just do it.
Oh, fair enough.
Are you saying only one person has translated this?
Her and her team,
Like
but
what-
she started it, and it's
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Was she like, elves need eternal life?
Don't they? Were they created in God's
Not
image?
really. They already have it to a certain
this is
degree.
Yeah, they are God's image.
And the
too.
earth is flat. Anyways, continue.
yes.
That's true.
And you can read sections of it. It does, like, it's transliterated, so it sounds cool.
Oh, so it's transliterated using the script.
So it's transliterated and translated.
Oh.
It's
So
both?
it's written in Elvish if
Wow.
you know how to read.
That's way
When you're-
nerdier
Can you
than I
hit
thought.
us?
And you can, as an English speaker,
What translation of the
read
Bible
it.
do they transliterate? Do you know?
Oh, I do not know.
That's pretty cool.
I
Yeah.
should quote some of that to people.
So, well, no.
That-
So
that
we
was
have
so-
it. I have a
you could s-
transliterated passage here.
You could sit with it. You could sit with this in a coffee shop, pretend to be reading it. People are going to be like, "What the hell are you reading?"
Yeah. So the transliterated
I like your
verse
accent.
is John 3:16.
Yeah.
Which sounds like this. An eru Emilie imartena anti ernona. Anyways,
Here's the thing. I've seen the movies and it sounds more. Yeah.
We need Aragorn to speak it.
Yeah,
Dude, could you do an audio Bible for us of just the Elvish audio?
I will translate.
Oh,
That sounds awful. I'm sorry.
I would do that.
The
Cole,
first
let's get this
product
done.
sold by
Just
Second Rate
ASMR,
Saints.
and it's just Josh reading the Elvish Bible.
However, there's an even better. No, not yet. A fictional language that is being translated into
Impossible.
Navi from the hit movie
Cringe.
Avatar.
No, that's cringe.
So this
Navi
is even
meaning
better.
prophet.
So this is even better. What I love about this is it's roughly been started by a man by a few people called the Navi Bible Translation Project.
Wow.
They only have 2 words so far. And it's hey and listen.
Nope,
That's funny. No, there's look as well. Look.
Listen.
That's a Legend of Zelda Ocarina
don't
of Time
explain it.
reference. Also, Navi in Hebrew is the word for prophet.
Yep. Don't explain the other joke.
So this is being done by a group of people. As I mentioned, the Navi Bible Translation Project. It is still underway of being translated. Not much has been released, like less than a book. The reason for that is because the guy who created the language Navi, a man named
James
Paul
Cameron?
Former, from the USC Marshall School of Business, has a doctorate of linguistics. He's like like Tolkien, has a love for languages and was contacted by
Unfortunately,
James
his
Cameron.
language was in one of the worst sci-fi movies to be made in modern times.
and he has developed enough of the language for the first 2 movies, but for Fox Studios and James Cameron is developing an entire dictionary and grammatical system and everything. It already works, but like a full thing for them to use for the future movies.
Sorry to interject. I want to take back my statement. It's not one of the worst sci-fi. I just don't like it very
You were
much.
guilted.
It's terrible. Can you imagine
It's not
making
very
the
good.
most money ever and then just using an average font for your title? Anyways, continue.
Papyrus.
Papyrus
Just
font.
papyrus
Continue.
font. I'm so irritated.
And so they are waiting for the full corpus of the language to be released before finishing the Bible so that they don't have to go back and edit a bunch of stuff. So that's fun. Then there are 2 more.
That's awesome,
There's one more fictional language and then 2 more.
Let's power through this.
Yeah, let's
Yes.
go quick.
We have Ladon, which is a fictional language by
Ladon.
Suzette Hayden Elgin's Native Tongue Trilogy, which is a story about a fictional future America where the 19th Amendment was never passed and women don't have rights.
Okay, I know this book. Yep.
Yeah. And so the women create in the future
Love
a
all
parallel
history.
language so that they can express themselves rather than using the male dominated English.
Wow.
And
That was my comment. I'm sorry.
No
yeah,
comment.
so they've translated a bunch of the Bible into this because actually part of the plot of the story is them translating the KJV into Ladon.
I thought we were going to talk about Newspeak.
Oh, no.
That
So
was
that's the
good
Queen
one.
James Bible, right?
So Newspeak, here we go. This is called...
Wait, Newspeak's on here?
No, not Newspeak, but they're following the same.
Oh.
It's called Toki Pona, a philosophical, artistic, constructed language. It's translated. So Toki Pona is using the language's own name for it. So translated into English, it means the language of good. It is a minimalist. It only has 137 words. It has 14 phonemes. So character, like they're not as simple as letter. They're more complicated than letters, but not as strong as like
Right.
full characters, like in Mandarin.
Like, okay.
Just kind of like a Korean type deal.
Yeah.
Somewhere in between.
Somewhere in, yeah. And the whole idea was it followed the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. So
what?
do you know what? So the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis is the hypothesis in 1984,
Okay.
which is used to construct Newspeak, that language determines a human's ability to think.
Right.
Which is somewhat proven.
Yes. And so what she did, this woman named Soja Lang,
Can we see
created Toki Pona to create a language that was positive in nature. So it doesn't have negatives. It has the negatives are derived like in Newspeak in 1984 as not good.
that? Right. That's the
Or-
opposite of what should be.
Yeah.
Right.
And so it is also each of the letters matches a color, each of the letters matches a number. And so it
Okay.
has this the language has a multifaceted purpose because it's minimalistic. And
how much of the Bible could actually be translated though?
That's what's fun. So it's an entire pair of like thought for thought translation. It's completely useless, but
nice.
But it's being translated, and this is the best one. Best for last.
Can we get Colton to read it before you explain it?
Yes.
Oh no!
This is
this the one you wanted me to read?
Colton, you're not allowed to stop. You're not allowed to ask. You have to read it as written.
Really?
Yes, and you cannot read the paragraphs around it. You just have to read. This is John 3:16.
Just John 3:16.
Yep, just that square.
Don't read face.
Read it out loud.
I have to read this.
I said no questions, Colton.
No, just
you gotta read it as written.
I hate myself already. I can't do this.
Does he have to do it phonetically or the way it
as written?
First of all, it's not spelled.
Okay,
like
don't explain
English,
it. Don't explain it.
So, like, to sealing Kitty likes the people lots, and so he says, "Oh hi, I gives you me only Kitty, and if you believes in him, you won't ever die no more. Thanks, bye." Oh, sorry, K. Thanks, bye.
Thank you.
Oh.
So that is what's known as...
I hate myself. That's being clipped like Cole immediately.
You could. There's a shower over there.
I need it. That's awful.
So that is what's known as lolcat or lulspeak.
Yes.
Lolcat is a historical internet meme that developed its own internet culture.
Yeah, OMG, so wow kind of
yes.
stuff. Yeah.
Exactly.
Hold on. You might know this better than most.
So, which caused a man named Ben-Hur, not Ben-Hur, to develop a collected understanding of the shared language. So he wrote an entire encyclopedia and corpus for how to read and write this language. Then in 2010, the translation of the Bible was complete.
The entire Bible?
The entire Bible.
Oh, that's the worst.
So it is a naturally developing internet language through meme culture.
Oh, it's not a conlang.
Yeah.
This is a real language.
Yes.
It's more like a dialect. Of
Yeah,
English.
it's more like a dialect.
Yeah.
Oh,
but that makes
disgusting.
No. Yeah, I know. I have the same response. Yeah.
It's
like Newfie.
Like,
it's
similar to Newfie, I
so
guess.
the textual basis for this language, for this translation, is none. The translation process is a complete reimagining. It's not dynamic equivalence or
Just
word for
whatever
word.
they
Are those the terms from the translator?
Yes.
Good.
So a
Yeah.
bunch of the Bible is just replaced with memes from lolcat, like culture and memehood.
Yeah, you'll see you'll be reading and then like a troll face pops up when
Yes.
Satan Judas betrays Jesus.
You've read more of this than you'd like to let on.
Is this real?
Yes.
Oh, actually,
Hold on, so I might have quote
joking.
unquote read / seen biblical passages from this translation
Yes.
online.
So
It's
some of the
infecting.
names for Jesus is Happy Kitty.
I hate this.
Why?
God is Ceiling Kitty.
Yeah.
And Satan is Basement Kitty.
See, that's funny. Basement Kitty's funny.
You're the target audience thing, Cole.
No,
You thought it was funny.
You can purchase the entire Bible.
For how much?
Lolcat. Let me.
Lol.
Holy moly. Could you imagine how bad it would be if you were to buy one of these and then give them to a King James onlyist?
No. Think about it this way.
Could you imagine?
I mean, it would only be made
It's
better by putting a
$17 on
KJV,
Amazon.
Holy.
rebinding a KJV with
Lolcat
this.
Bible.
So good.
Hear this. Here's another passage. Genesis 1:1. Into beginning, Ceiling Cat mated to skies and to earths and stuff.
Okay, that's enough. Anyway,
So those are some controversial Bible translations, which
translation do you want the least?
so, I mean, we do have to kind of like we did with the other things. Is any of these useful?
No.
Okay. Hold on.
As any
Not any of half of this episode was us going over. These are like there's
Yeah.
a time and a place.
I thought you were
Yes.
just talking about these last transliteration, weird
Well,
language.
Well, no,
translation ones.
these 6, because we've talked about the other 3,
Okay.
right? Of the message, is it useful for certain things, right? Is for the kind of person, if you're doing evangelism at Comic-Con,
No.
I give them a message over this.
No, because you want them to start taking life seriously.
yes.
No, so introduce something serious into their life, like the message at least.
See, I I might kick back a little bit on that, Caleb.
Why?
Because I think that if we can somehow connect a love for languages and a love for translation, that's cool.
I think you're. I think that's a pastoral nightmare.
Oh,
for sure. There's no like
the amount of cases where what I'm saying is effective is one.
Also, let's move this into a kind of a harder question. Can you say that the Elvish Bible is inspired?
The transliteration, yes.
The translation.
The translation one, I'd have to look at it more. How about is lolcat translate paraphrase or whatever it is?
Complete reimagining.
Complete reimagining. Is it blasphemous / sacrilegious a bit? Do you think?
Yeah, that one borders on blasphemous.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. If it's a language, is it?
Or is it a joke?
I mean, it's a joke. It can be both. So
it's definitely started there.
Here's the thing. The Elvish and the Na'vi are completely constructed. They have everything a language does that humans have made, right? They're not jokes. They are fictional.
Except for people who speak them.
Yes.
They are jokes?
Yes. Does this satisfy the every tongue, tribe, and nation?
No.
Yeah, it almost feels like, hey, why'd you translate into Elvish? Like we still don't have one for New Guinea or whatever, right? Like,
correct.
I'm sure we do, but it just feels a little bit like that's what you were doing.
Totally.
Well, think about it this way: if you're going to go to the guy who did the lolcats one, he's in the middle of categorizing every single word and all.
Categorizing.
You're too proud of yourself for that one. Too proud for yourself for that one. But he's busy making this and getting all the grammar and putting it all together. At some point during that, someone came up to him and went, "Hey, is this a good use of your time?" And he went, "Yes." And he was absolutely wrong.
But here's the thing. Why did Mark Schulson do it? Because I don't know enough about Mark Schulson, the guy that did the Klingon version. What if through translating it, because he's a nerd, he became a Christian?
Well, here's a better thing. Okay?
Well, I mean, that only works if it did, but sure.
No, but
for something like the Klingon version, what I could see is you're in a small group of people that are fascinated with this language.
Yes.
You can contact, hey, I'm going to do this. If you want to help, like, let's help each other learn our Klingon language, but I'm going to do this as a project. Why don't you help me?
Mm-hmm.
And you get people to this. I'm making the best case I can. Okay.
Yes.
And you get people who would not otherwise read the Bible to help you translate it into a imaginary language that you're learning with your friends.
Yeah.
That's the best case scenario. And it works once.
Okay.
As someone who likes a lot of Star Trek stuff, the best I can give is that it's fun.
Okay.
You do it because it's interesting, not because it's actually useful.
Well, it's where no man's gone before.
What's with the puns today?
It's not really a pun. It's more of a quote.
Okay. Here's the thing. This is going to be the most open crackpot Josh defense of something.
I'm so
I
ready.
was going to say that's
I think
the tall call.
That if God is willing to allow his word to save his people be spoken through a donkey.
Mm-hmm.
He can use nerds.
He could use.
No, he will use.
He could use Kenwa.
Even if it's one case,
Quenwa.
2 cases, 5 cases, a handful of cases for each of these languages. Lolcat excluded. I mean, the Klingon, the Elvish, the one where they have almost 10,000, 20, 50,000 people that know these languages as well as Spanish, right? That there are nerds out there who are fascinated and are enveloped in how stories and myths work. And they are the kind of people that if you could translate, that they would read the Bible, that might see, because they are so deep into stories and storied thinking, that they would be able to get something out of it. But something like translating it into what's an example? Like these two things, these two languages, Klingon and Elvish, have a big enough fan base where I think it could be effective. I think translating it into Ladon, which a fictional series 5 people have read, was a waste of time.
Yes.
But I think Elvish and Klingon, and potentially, depending on how big Avatar gets, Na'vi, it should not be the focus of Christianity. It should not be what we desire to do. But I think there's enough there that it was worth it for maybe a few people. Here's
the thing. As much as I really want to agree with you, because you're speaking to me, I love those languages. They're awesome. As much as I want to, I don't see how actually translating them into these languages, and especially giving it to someone, would actually help with that, rather than just having that conversation with them. Well, and just having it in English. All it does to me is it's a fascinating little thing that all of the people who read Klingon and all the people who read Elvish will see as, oh, that's fun, but they don't really care about the heart of it. And so
I think 99% of them will have that reaction.
I think it'd be 100 with the amount of people who actually speak it, even 40,000.
I think there's a case where 1 or 2 could see it, and it would be the door opening for them, and that's it. Like like the fact that it was translated would be the door opening. They read a few passages because
that is the value of it, right? Like in order to be recognized as an actual language or even a dialect of English, you have to have a certain amount published in your dialect. So it actually helps them build the language.
Yeah, like lolcats.
Like lolcats. I got to look into that, because if that's a registered dialect, then I'm less proud. My own dialect.
English should burn.
No, it's extremely useful.
It only took me reading John 3:16 and one dialect for you to go, throw it all away. It's gone.
English, let's go back to Latin, boys.
It's not just throw the baby out with the bathwater, it's throw the house out with the bathwater.
Going back to ancient Sumerian, the only untainted language.
I think you could conduct Latin Mass in Elvish, and a certain percentage wouldn't understand.
It would be so cool.
Because that would be kind of like, I got you. I think functionally, if they don't understand it, it doesn't change anything about the service.
This is true.
And it would also sound cooler.
I don't know about that.
Cooler than Latin? I would step off of that one, maybe.
I think the one language that could sound cooler than Latin is Elvish from Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, it's fair.
No, it's too breathy.
It's so dope.
Weird. It's weird that you think that.
Bunch of flat earthers. Anyways.
No, you're gaslighting me.
Yeah, well, that might be, but.
Well, guys.
I think it's fun.
Thanks for talking about controversial translations.
There's a lot.
This has been a bit of a longer episode, I'm sure. We've definitely hit our time. But thank you for listening to part 2 of the Battle of the Bible series. I've certainly enjoyed it. Don't turn off the recording yet. I haven't plugged the website, Josh. Sit down, man.
I'm just waiting.
Okay. So if you'd like to check out our past and future episodes, check us out at secondratesaints.com. If you'd like to send in a question, comment, or concern for our 100th episode, again, send that at secondраtesaints@gmail.com. If you'd like to support the podcast, go to buymeacoffee.com/secondраtesaints. Yeah, look forward to hearing from you, and have a great week.
I really want to read the Red Book, but I haven't been able to get my hands on it.
Do you think if Paul Walker survived, we'd call him Paul Wheelchairer?